Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Leaders Lane. Today we're talking to Larry Namer. We're going off script with a true entertainment trailblazer. He's an award-winning media veteran known for launching networks, discovering talent, and shaping pop culture across the globe. He's the co-founder of 𝐸 Entertainment Television, a network you've probably watched without ever knowing the story behind it. It was a staple of my 20s and I loved it. Fast forward to today, it's valued at over $5 billion and broadcast in more than 140 countries. While many might call Larry a disruptor and an innovator and an entertainment pioneer, he'll tell you he's a simple guy from Coney Island who's passionate about cooking and sharing a meal with family and friends. Now, in his new book, Offscript, Larry gives us a backstage pass to the wild ride from local cable to global icon. He's the exception, a leader with a curious mind and a playlist that jumps from Eminem to Adele, Talking Heads and 50 Cent, showing us that anything is possible. So let's welcome him to the conversation. Larry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Nice for having me.
So for our listeners that may not have heard your story as yet, you grew up in Coney Island. And could you give us a bit of a snapshot of what life was like before you became who you are today?
Sure. I grew up in an area of Brooklyn which never got gentrified like the rest of Brooklyn, so it's still the hood. It was a rough neighborhood, still is a rough neighborhood. Parents were immigrant stock. My dad ended up working for driving a Pepsi Cola delivery truck, and my mom worked for the Department of Social Services for New York City. Their aspiration for their children was to get a safe, secure civil service job so you could retire with a pension and do all of that. But for whatever reason, I didn't find that was the path I wanted to take. So I was the first kid to go to college in the family. Graduated with a degree in economics, quickly found out that there weren't many jobs for people with degrees in economics. I took what I thought was going to be a very temporary job. Somebody in the electrical workers union told me that they just organized this thing called cable TV and go see the union guy there and he'll give me a temporary job. And I did, and they gave me a job. My job was I was an assistant underground splicer, which meant I would go under the streets of New York every day in the sewers and put the wires together, and see the rats and the roaches and all of that. And they paid me $90 a week. And so that's how I started right out of college. I kind of rose through the ranks of the technical ranks very quickly. So I went from an assistant splicer to becoming a splicer, and then a construction guy, and then an installer and a service guy. And then being still in the union, they actually asked me to be on the negotiating committee. The company got bought by Time Incorporated, which was a big publishing company before Time Warner. And so you had all the Harvard and Yaleys on one side of the negotiating table, and then you had basically me and a bunch of folks who barely had high school diplomas negotiating on behalf of the union. But we ended up negotiating a pretty successful contract. And, the heads of the union said, hey, we really like what you managed to accomplish there. And they made me the vice chairman of the Cable TV Workers Union. I was 23 years old, and it was just totally bizarre. So that's how I kind of got started. But then Timing put one of their fair-haired boys in as president of the company because they were grooming him for, bigger and better things. He kept asking me to come into management, and I refused a bunch of times. But then finally he convinced me. So at 25, they made me the director of operations of Manhattan Cable, which then was the largest cable system in the United States. So all those departments that I kind of worked my way through from, the splicer through the serviceman, all of those departments ended up reporting to me when I was 25. So that's kind of how it all started.
Amazing. So one thing I noticed, what stood out for me when I was reading your book, you said that you really stood out in the beginning for where you were working because you took time to figure out what you were doing and why you were doing it. And I thought this was very simple, but it was often something that people overlook to do. They think they can do a better job, or they think their way is the right way, but you really knuckled down and just, for example, at this time read the manual, and you said by reading this you also had innovative ideas. Could you talk to me a little bit about that approach?
It was kind of funny because I was an assistant splicer, and then I was there for maybe a few weeks when the head of the union came to me one day and goes, and he goes, "Hey kid," because then I was still a kid, "how did you learn how to use all this equipment so quick? It usually takes people a year or two." And I go, "Well, it was simple. I read the instruction booklet." So yes, I read everything. I became fascinated with it. So I not only read the instruction books for that, but I would literally read all the trade magazines for, not just the cable industry, but engineering. And, of course, again, I was kind of rising into engineering areas without really having any engineering background. So I just started trying to consume as much education as I could.
And I also, in preparation for this interview, I can't remember if I read it or I heard it, but I heard you talk about how you grew up in a family where they sort of instilled success. So it wasn't like, am I going to be successful? They sort of supported you like, yes, you will be successful. I thought that was really interesting.
My dad in particular and my mom, we were going to be American kids as quick as possible. And, we were going to be successful whether we liked it or not. And my father was just very focused on me getting into better schools and doing all of that and pushing. They started my work life. I was 12. Boy, I didn't get my summers off to play with my friends. I ended up having to work. So, I guess that's how I developed my work ethic. But yeah, they were very, very focused on, making sure that, I was the oldest, making sure that I was going to go to college and get through college. And I didn't really have much of a choice. I was just told you're doing it whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because often today you hear stories about people, they're like, am I going to be successful? There's a lot of self-doubt creeping in. And I'm curious, on your journey, particularly when you were younger, did you still feel like you had that within you? Or do you feel like because of your environment, you were just like, no, I can do this?
No, I was always pretty confident and stuff. And again, I grew up in a very tough neighborhood. We learned street level survivor skills there. And, you kind of got the feeling that, most of the stuff that I think other people let bother them really seemed inconsequential to, us, like, kids that from the neighboring, areas would be worried they didn't get enough presents for Christmas, and we were happy to get one. So it was a whole different way of looking at things.
Yeah. And so you were also known as the negotiator as you climbed up the ranks. And you very beautifully talked about how you always talked about being fair to the people around you and whoever you were working with, no matter what level they were at. And I guess from that, I took how you treat people is how you were remembered, particularly since you rose in the ranks later on. What was your training ground for becoming such a good negotiator, do you think?
Well, I was very fortunate in that, I rose through the ranks at Manhattan Cable at a very early age. And like I said, I was 25. I was the director of operations, and I had over 300 people reporting to me then. So you had to start learning management skills pretty quickly. But Time Inc. had bought the company, and Time Inc. was very good in having programs to train their managers and executives and stuff. So mainly they used them in their publishing unit. But when they got into cable and they started putting their people into the cable companies, those people brought those skills with them. So there was this, the one guy who convinced me to move from union into management, named Nick Nicholas. Nick Nicholas ended up going on when Time merged with Warner. He ended up becoming the chairman of Time Warner. So he was clearly, destined for stardom. But he was very, very tough and demanding to work for. But you always felt good working for him. You always felt that no matter what, you were going to get a fair shake at stuff. And and he used to tell me, he goes, "Larry, you could be as tough as you possibly want to be, but make sure all the time people realize that you're being fair with them. And, whether it's recognize them monetarily or just going, by somebody and say, hey, good job. Just always make sure they understand that you are fair.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's something that's missing in a lot of workplaces today, or do you think that there's more of that?
No, I think it's terribly missing in workplaces today. I think, when I look at workplaces, there's a distinct lack of social skills there. I mean, I just see people, and maybe it's the fault of social media, and the fact that people are isolated, sitting on their things instead of learning how to talk to people and things. But it's problematic. People are not developing kind of the soft skills or the social skills that are necessary to survive in the workplace. And then you had the pandemic, and for people got used to working from home, so they were literally working isolated, and then all of a sudden people, bosses are demanding that you come back to the workplace. And a lot of people were just totally lost by that. They didn't know how to go back to the workplace and still don't. And so they lost several years of that socializing and developing, those kind of skills.
Do you feel that when we're around more people that we have a tendency to be more creative? Because it feels like when you were, building your career and you were constantly surrounded by people, you were communicating with people, and you naturally have shared that you have a very curious mind with lots of ideas. So do you feel like it contributes to more creativity, having more of that communication and being around others?
Yeah, I think it definitely contributes to more creativity. And I think having people around you that you kind of get very comfortable and you trust, and are not just going to give you, they're not going to feed back to you what they think you want to hear, but what they really believe there. And that takes a while before people can get the confidence to tell you the truth, because sometimes it's not pretty what they're telling you, but they have to feel comfortable doing it. And I've always worked in collaborative situations because I could get my ideas like 80% to where they need to be, but then I rely on other people to go, no, especially in China and Russia, where I've been doing stuff in countries I didn't grow up in and cultures I don't necessarily fully understand. To have people go, no, that's not the way we look at things in China, is become invaluable to me. There's no other way that I could have survived, and particularly in China, but also in Russia. I had the number one TV show in Russia for almost 11 years. I didn't grow up there, and it was not easy. But I just had all these smart people around me who would help me take what an idea that was maybe 80% and refine it to the point where it became 100%.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like as well, like you're very open to that process too, because sometimes people get so precious about their ideas and they're like, nope, this is my idea. I want it done my way. But it sounds like your strength. You can get it to 80%. And then it's like, that's when you involve someone else, to take it to that 100.
Yeah, no, I'm very aware that I'm good at the first 80%, but I need folks around me who can help me get that 80 to 100.
Okay. So talk to me about E. What was the beginnings, what started sparking in your mind to create this show?
Sure. Well, I got recruited to come out to California and build the first 61 channel interactive cable system in the United States, the Los Angeles system. When you're a Brooklyn kid and you come out to LA and everybody's going to parties and premieres and all of this stuff, which I never even dreamt I would, be exposed to that world. I would see everybody go into all this great stuff, and I would call the studios and say, hey, could you put me on the list? And they would go, no, you're kind of like the phone company or the gas company, you're a utility, and no. And then finally I met someone who was like in marketing at a studio. And I said to him, you got to answer this because I don't understand. The most efficient vehicle that you have to make me want to see a movie is the movie trailer. But yet the only time I ever see a movie trailer is when I'm already in the movies. I said, wouldn't you want me to see that when I'm at home to make me want to go to the movies? And they said, yeah, but it's very expensive. We can't afford it. I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You send me those movie trailers, I'll put them on TV, but you put me on those lists. And they went, yeah, sure. And for me, it was nothing because we were building the first 61 channel cable system and there weren't 61 channels in existence. So I had I had plenty of open space. So when we started doing audience surveys, what's your favorite channel? They would go, oh, I love CNN, I love ESPN, I love that trailer channel. And I'm going, wait a second, I get the best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie. Back then it was only 50. I get it for free, but yet people love it. And I kind of filed that in the back of my head. And then what happened was the company that I worked for, which was really a Canadian company, they sold out and they moved back to Toronto. And they were like, okay, Larry, when are you coming to Toronto? And I went, no. I didn't go from New York to LA to go to Toronto. I said, I'm done with coal. That's not happening. So, I stayed there. Me and my friend Alan just started kicking around ideas. And we always played with this thought that cable TV back then was like an electronic newspaper. We said CNN is the headlines, ESPN is the sports page, the home shopping network are the classified ads. But what was clearly missing was the entertainment pages, which were the second most read page of any newspaper. And so we were going, now, wait a second. I did that trailer thing while I was at Valley Cable and people loved it. I said, when you think about it, MTV, which was still pretty fresh and new then, they would stand a host in front of a green screen and go, and Madonna has a new video. I said, we could stand a host in front of a green screen and go, and Schwarzenegger has a new movie. Very high value content at literally no cost. And so that's how we started. And it was initially called Movie Time. We later changed the name to E. And we thought and my partner Alan and I, we thought we were really smart. We wrote a business plan. And, at that time, it was the cost to start a TV network is around $100 million US. We would go around and, people say to me, it's an interesting idea, but people don't start TV networks. You got to be a big media company to do it. You got to be Fox. You got to be Disney. You can't just be a person and go out and start a TV network. We really didn't pay much attention to that naively, but we're about 3.5 years in and weren't able to raise 10 cents, just nothing. And then finally we met someone on a plane who said, oh, I know this company that just started an investment banking group and they're looking for deals. Why don't you go see this guy? And so we did. We called the guy. We went and visited him. And it was kind of interesting. Young guy. We went in his office. He had movie posters on the wall. And we were like looking at each other going, that's weird. And he goes, well, I used to be the entertainment reporter for my college newspaper. And we're like, yeah, okay. And he goes, I really want to do this. I said, great. I said, when can we come by and get the $100 million? And he goes, oh, no. I'm only allowed to sign for 2.5. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do with 2.5? It costs 100. And he goes, well, that's all I'm allowed to sign for. So Alan and I just looked at each other and said, you know what? Nobody's ever given us $100 million. So we just took the 2.5. And I had a friend who was teaching radio, television, film at University of Texas in Austin. And I called him up and I said, Brian, do you have a bunch of kids that need intern jobs this summer? And he went, yeah, we had a hard time placing kids. I said, send me who you got. And so he literally sent us 31 interns from UT, Texas. And what people don't realize now, because he's a monster, it's 142 countries and the valuation's up, it's around 7 billion now. And arguably the biggest influencer of pop culture in the world. Everybody talks about influencers. There's nothing that is a bigger influencer on a global scale than he is. And so people think that it came out of some huge company, but it really came from two guys from the East Coast who weren't smart enough to run away. 11 employees and 31 interns.
Doesn't that just blow your mind? Like, it's so cool that you took this idea together and you've just turned it into this incredible network. I think it's just amazing watching it. And I know it's your life, and you know how sometimes you look at your own life and you think, oh, well, yeah, I've done some really cool things, and maybe because they're yours, they don't look the same as they do on the outside to other people. Kind of like you talked about in your book, you hadn't shared your story so much because you thought, oh, this is my life sort of thing. I think it's amazing and such an incredible feat. I'm curious, when you were talking about the 3 years where you didn't make any money, what was that experience for you like personally?
Well, you question yourself going, am I being silly and naive here to think that we might be able to do this? We never doubted that it was a good idea.
Okay.
But, we ended up pitching over 100 different groups and were rejected by all. There was even one thing where we pitched someone who was so offended by the fact that Alan and I thought we could do this that he literally threw the business plan at me. I mean, then you used to have paper business plans. It was before people started doing on computers. Literally threw the plan, 200-page thing at my head. And, so it was really strange. But, getting back to your thing, yeah, I look at it and go, okay, we figured out that people around the world love Hollywood gossip and celebrities. It's not rocket science. We didn't cure cancer. So
yeah,
we did execute very, very well and very smart and stuff. But we're amazed that people didn't get it before we did.
If you were to think back to all those pitches that you did before landing the deal, what would you say is one of the number one things that you would recommend to people that are going out there and pitching for new business or, starting a new project of some sort?
Well, I always tell people, particularly entrepreneurs, stay away from pitching something about this is my passion project, because I think everybody's gotten wise to most passion projects are really nothing more than hobbies as opposed to being viable businesses. And I think you lose a lot of potential investors in things, by pitching it. I'm so passionate about, this, or I'm so passionate about that. You got to just really stick. Investors invest to make money. Don't ever get fooled into think they're investing for any other reason. So just focus on the fact, if you invest this amount with me, here's what we project your returns are going to be, and just stick with a very financially focused pitch.
Do you feel that when you were pitching that you took that approach, or was that something you learned afterwards?
We learned it doing it. And again, the biggest objection that we are, people are like, this is an interesting idea, but you're not a big media company, and people do not. That was the biggest thing we heard over and over. You're not a big media company. People cannot start a TV network. It's not possible. Go away. Go get a job in a restaurant or something.
Yeah. Was it helpful to have Alan by your side? So in those moments where you're facing rejection after rejection, that you both just look at each other and go, no, we'll try it again.
Yeah. I mean, and we were a very interesting pair because I was the detail guy and I was very operations oriented, because that's why I grew up literally right out of college. I was in the operating side of big businesses. And Alan was more Mr.
Yeah.
And you needed both. We couldn't have succeeded being one or the other. We had to be both. So while I was inside making sure that the programming that's supposed to get on at 8:00 tonight got on at 8:00, Alan was having dinner with Paula Abdul or, Kris Kardashian or somebody like that, doing all the things we needed to get the support of Hollywood and the support of studios behind us, which, so again, it was a combination of the two, which was a very odd pairing, but it was exactly what was needed for that company at that time.
Do you have any advice or wisdom for people when they are doing collaborations or partnerships, if it's not just their own business idea?
Yeah, I think, choose your partners very carefully, because, you're basically going to be living together as if you're married. It's no different than a wedding. And you have to be very flexible. You have to be willing to give and go, you know what? I don't really see it that way, but if you really feel strongly about it, okay, we'll go with your side of it. And you have to be able to compromise all the time. And you have to be able to accept that your partner is not you. They don't necessarily share the same values, nor should they. I mean, again, the reason Al and I really worked together was he loved doing all the Hollywood stuff, and I hated doing all the Hollywood stuff, but somebody had to do it. But then again, somebody had to be inside to make sure that we made payroll every Friday. So it was a great combo.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it was and is. And so tell me, as once, you got the deal and things started growing, how did you find the growth part? Was that also a huge learning curve, or did you find that you had enough people around you to support you along the way?
Oh, no, not even close. Again, we started with 11 employees, 31 interns. But as soon as we went on the air, People will go, oh my God, that's what you wanted to do. You should have told us. We would have given you money 3 years ago. We were an instant success that took 3.5 years to get going. My friend who sent us all the interns hated me because, he sent me these 31 kids at the beginning of the summer, and we grew so fast. By the end of the summer, half of those kids were vice presidents. We just grew enormously. I mean, the first year we were in 14. We became the fastest growing cable network in the world. The first year we were in 14 other countries. So you didn't have time to really sit back and dwell on what you were doing. You just were on autopilot and you did it. I mean, I think the company went in 3 years to 1,100 employees, which is quite a growth curve.
Yeah. And what kind of hours were you keeping, and how are you looking after your own mental well-being and your health and all of that?
The hours, the thing with a cable network, a 24-hour TV network, is you never could watch all the things that you produce. I mean, so sometimes I would just have to stay up just to see what my own company was doing, because again, 24 hours a day, and you can't stay awake 24 hours a day. You couldn't work 24 hours a day. But I always I love to cook, which you gathered from the book. For me, cooking is therapy, stress relief. So I don't meditate. Cooking is my meditation. So when I get stressed out, I go in the kitchen, and by the time I finish the chopping and preparing and all that stuff, what bothered me an hour ago no longer bothers me. And I also, I go to the gym 6 days a week. I do 1 hour, because I could always find an hour in the day. 6 days a week, I'm in the gym for an hour. And I do the cooking and the physical fitness religiously.
Mm-hmm.
So I could put in, if I have to do a 14-hour day because I'm in production on something, I have no problem doing it. I've got the stamina and stuff, but I've got to keep up, as you get older and older, you got to make sure you keep up the fitness routine.
Yeah. How important would you say, for anyone listening, is having some sort of working out, meditation, cooking, something else that they love, in addition to whatever that they're building?
Oh, I think it's very, very important. You need to have that time away from the stress of the job to let you kind of clear your head and think about, things. And then I also found, a lot of stuff that bothers you at the moment it happens. If you just get away from it for a little bit, whether it's going in the kitchen and cooking, going to the gym, by the time you finish with it, you come back and you go, I can't believe I let that bother me. It really is. In the scheme of things, it's so inconsequential.
Are you someone that is good at compartmentalizing? So if something happened yesterday, you're able to move on with it fairly quickly, or do you dwell on things as well?
No, I move on. I'm for what's next. I've never been about what was. I'm always about what's next.
That's a good approach to have, for sure. Particularly also in the industry that you're in, it's fast moving. There's not really time to dwell on those things.
Absolutely, yeah. You got to be. And that goes for literally everything. I mean, trends and changes in audience behavior, changes in technology, changes in the geography of the media business. You got to be thinking about where you're going as opposed to where you are.
Because when you started, the industry technology has changed so much over the years. Have you loved the change? Have you found it overwhelming? What's been your process with that?
I've loved the change. And I think, having my beginning of my career at Time Incorporated, which was very, very structured corporation, I learned about how corporations work and how the decision process works, and how a lot of the way those things are organized really do stifle innovation and creativity. And so I've always been able to use that to my advantage. I could look at something. I mean, when I first got involved with the media business, if I did a business plan and I did the financials, you would weight them 95% US and 5% other. I mean, you didn't even give the rest of the world the names. You just called it other. You go back to today and it's 30% US. But then you even have to name Australia. There are so many, and China is now the number one film market in the world. So, but we realized very early on things were changing, because at the beginning, everybody had to come to Hollywood, because to make visual entertainment, you needed big sound stages and very expensive equipment. But as technology kept bringing those costs down, people all around the world were saying, hey, wait a second, we don't have to go to Hollywood. We can make this here in Germany, or make it in Sydney, or any place. So we realized that while creativity and certain quality standards was still going to be part of Hollywood, Hollywood was becoming more of a measure of creativity and quality as it was a geographic place. So we really started paying attention to that. And then paying attention to changes in audience behavior. As we saw the inevitability of the digital world, we realized that analog television, and analog being you create a show that goes on Thursday night at 8 o'clock, and you had to watch it on the 50-inch TVC screen in the living room. We said those things are going to be gone. There's going to be a time where people are going to watch what they want to watch, when they want to watch it, on the device they want to watch it on. So rather than wait for it, we'll get there first, and let the big companies spend their years of boardrooms and budget approvals and stuff like that trying to catch up to us, rather than us trying to catch up with them. Because you can never catch up to them, because they can outspend you any day in the world. You need to get there first.
Mm. Yeah, I find it all fascinating how quickly it changes. And I was actually just having a conversation with my 7-year-old nephew this morning in the car. I was dropping him to school, and we were talking about Minecraft, the game. He was asking me some questions, and I said, oh, I think it was around when I was younger, because I said I haven't really played it recently. And I said, oh, but it's probably a lot more techie now. And he goes, oh, what does techie mean? And I thought, well, what am I trying to say here? And what I was trying to say to him was like, when I was young, the computer, and I basically said this to him, was a big box, a big thing. And I was saying, how everything looks real when you look at a computer now? It was more like your Garmin watch, where it doesn't look like that. And so he's like piecing things together, which was kind of funny just to see the generational differences. That's his world right now. He's like devices, iPads, all that. Like that didn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, like my kids, particularly my youngest son, who actually is living in London now, he graduated Boston College. He has never lived through a time where he had to watch something when somebody else wanted him to watch it. He was like, well, what do you mean it's only on at 8 o'clock and stuff? I want to watch it at 9:30 tonight and stuff. Yeah. So never quite grasped that, that kind of stuff. And just so used to it. Now my daughter has a baby, and, he'll never know anything other than, where technology is today. I mean, he's not going to believe you couldn't watch what you wanted to watch, or that, one time the thought of having a thing in your pocket that you could call people on, I mean, was unthinkable. And that you have a watch that works as a telephone. It's crazy stuff. I mean, you look at what we do in China, and we produce stuff in China. We produce in Chinese, in Mandarin, for the Chinese audience. 70% of what we produce there, people watch on a cell phone, not on a TV set. So we've had to actually change the way we produce, because you can't do shots with 4 and 5 people in it. Because on a 50-inch TV set, it looks great, but on a 5-inch phone screen, you look at it and it looks like nothing but a blur. Yeah. And so we've actually had to adapt the way we produce.
That's so fascinating. Yeah, it is. It's really interesting, all the technology and the way that it's changed and adapted. So then tell me a little bit about the book Offscript. What made you want to write this book?
Well, people have been after me to write the book for God knows how long and stuff, and I've just resisted, going, you know what, I'm not ready to write a last chapter yet. I still think my better stuff is in front of me as opposed to behind me. But then my daughter had a baby. And so now I have this little grandbaby. And I said, the last thing in the world I want is my daughter to explain me to my grandson. I said, so I'm going to write a book so he gets it straight from my mouth. But we realized that you literally could take my career and divide it up into 8 different times. My growing up in Brooklyn, my Manhattan cable years, my Valley cable years, my E years, Russia, China, et cetera, et cetera. And, again, being a fanatic cook, I said, you know what, this could be interesting. I'll break everything up into those 8 segments, and I'll write stories that applied during those times, but I'll match them with the recipes that inspired me at those times. So the book is somewhere between a memoir and a cookbook. So when I realized that I could have fun writing it, that's when I just decided to go off and do it.
How long did it take you?
Well, 20 years to plan it and 3 months to write it.
That's awesome. Yeah. And did you enjoy the writing process?
Yeah, it was really interesting because you had to really dig back and think about things that you haven't thought about in like a long time, and then looking back and writing it, once you write one thing, you go, oh my God, that leads me to something else, that leads me to something else. And then that's where you really start to go, I can't believe I did that. Because on a day-to-day basis, I don't think about those kind of things. But then like looking back, like the first time Vladimir Putin ever came to the United States, he was my guest. I had to go to the embassy in Moscow and sign that, if he gets sick, I'll pay for his medical expenses. And so I brought him to the U.S. and introduced him to Henry Kissinger, who was our, U.S. And I think about that, going, this little dopey kid from Coney Island introduced two world leaders to each other. I mean, that's kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it must be nice, like reflecting back over time. And I'm sure that as you wrote, like you were saying, through that excavation process, and you remember things that have been filed away in those memory files somewhere. So it must have been nice to revisit them as well.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff you just, like I say, you don't think about, but and this is where the stories and the cookbook side of this kind of blend. Like I remembered the first time Alan and I ever had lunch with O.J. Simpson. And so not only do I tell the story of how we met and how we met for lunch, but I actually remembered what I had for lunch that day and where we had the lunch. So in the book is not just the story, but the recipe of what I ate.
It's such a unique way to tell your story. And I definitely, when I got to the end, I had a smile on my face going through the different recipes and reading that. And I thought it was a really unique approach. And I think it just shows your approach to what you do with anything, it's like bring creativity into it, have fun with it, and enjoy the process.
Yeah. I mean, that's it, particularly with everybody treated Hollywood news and features like it was like some miracle thing, like they were curing cancer. I mean, we changed the red carpet because back then, people would be on the red carpet going, so Mr. Cruise, tell me about your next movie. We didn't care about his next movie. We were like, whoa, those are great shoes, Tom. Where do you get those shoes? What do you do with your kids on the weekend? So It totally changed the way celebrity culture was covered.
Yeah, I think that's also something that I've noticed just in general, especially with more and more technology behind businesses. People want to get to know the people behind the brand or the business because, we can't connect with the face of an organization. It's different. But when we get to see people behind the brand, it just allows us to peek into their lives or, feel the story, not just hear about it.
It humanizes the brand. And I mean, you begin to, particularly Rich, as you go, you know what, that actually makes sense. I like that person. So therefore I like that brand.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, you're also really big on family and friends, and you talk a lot about happiness in the book. Not a lot, but I felt like it was a key theme throughout the book, which I thought was really beautiful. And for you, you've always cared about your family and that they were happy in their lives. Talk to me a little bit about why you feel that happiness is more important than the other stuff.
Well, I think, ultimately we're all here for relatively the same amount of time. Some of us will live to 90, some of us will go at 70, but pretty much we're all here for the same amount of time. And I really do believe that our purpose in life is to leave this world better than we found it in every way, from the people, from the animals to the environment. That's our responsibility. That's why we were put here by whoever you believe is the divine force. I just felt that most of what we do as human beings, 80% of our experience is common. Doesn't make a difference where in the world we come from. 20% is based on what geography we grew up in, but we all have the same human nature things. We want to be able to live comfortably. We want to be able to educate our kids, to have a roof over our heads and stuff like that. And even with my mom, it was interesting because she would always, when my daughter would, through her teenage years, would go out with a boy, my mother would go, is it serious? And I'm going, what do you mean, is it serious? She goes, well, are they talking about marriage? I go, Mom, I'm more concerned that Nicole is happy than she is married. If marriage is what makes her happy, that's great. I'll support it. But she doesn't have to be married to make herself happy or make me happy.
Yeah.
And that's the way I get along with a lot of diverse groups. I'm very, very big in helping my friends in the LGBTQI community and stuff. And people don't necessarily understand it because I'm like alpha male. And I just said, they have the right to be everybody has the right to be happy. I mean, and we shouldn't impart our views over anybody. As long as they're not hurting people or hurting the environment or hurting anything, let them do what makes them happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was very beautiful. I noticed that you are very accommodating is not the right word. Very open to different cultures, different differences. Some people can be very rigid in their thinking, but I got the sense that, basically from, I think you mentioned it was from growing up, in such a diverse cultural environment, that you didn't have any prejudices as such. So I think it's a really beautiful thing to hear someone like yourself, talking about things like that. I think you're leading the way for others to also follow suit.
Yeah, a lot of it, I think when you get exposed to it, you kind of open your eyes and go, you know what, they're not so different than I am. And again, could be, sexual orientation or geography or whatever. You realize that we have much more in common with each other than we do have differences with each other. And growing up in the neighborhood I grew up in, it was diverse. I mean, Coney Island was not even majority Caucasian white. I mean, it was very, very mixed with African American and Puerto Rican and stuff. And we just all thought we were the same. I mean, we go out in the street, those are your neighbors and your friends. So you kind of grew up not fearing people that were different, but basically liking it, I mean, I used to love to be able to go to my friend's house and, eat their food, because it was such a treat and it was so different.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we wrap up our conversation, I want to ask you, is there anything that you would love to share with our listeners that I haven't touched on with you yet?
No, I think, again, my advice to entrepreneurs is, don't take yourself so seriously. I mean, I wake up at 10 new ideas every day, and by the time I go to sleep, I realize that probably all 10 were dopey. Every once in a while, I'll have a good one. Is self-assess, and don't be afraid to go, you know what? It sounded like it was a good idea, but maybe it wasn't. The environment changed or the regulatory changed or something changed, and, okay, it's okay to let go. And what's next? Again, we all have this limited amount of time on the planet, and time is the most valuable thing we have as human beings. And when you stick with things too long, you're not spending time on the things that really could be successful and stuff. And most people get caught up with this follow your passion stuff. And like I say, most people's passions are nothing more than hobbies. And, the realities of life take over. You got to pay the landlord for your rent, and you got to buy food, and you got to educate your kids and stuff. So I always say to people, find something that you're good at and then just work your butt off and become great at it. And then that will become your passion. And by that being your passion, it's then give you the resources to play around with all the hobbies you want.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such beautiful advice. And I love that you do talk on the part where, even if you decide that you want to do something and then halfway through, or not even halfway through, something changes. I love that you're saying it's okay to let it go or to change direction, because you're right. Like, sometimes holding on can be the worst thing in the world, and you can't get that time back.
Yeah, you can never get the time back. You just have to maximize the value of your time.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, I'm going to finish off with the Leaders Lane sprint, just 4 quick fire questions for you.
Sure.
So my first question is, what's one of the best experiences you've had in your life?
Probably the birth of my kids. I got 3 of them, and each time was different and special. And, And if I had to look back and go, what were the ones that put the biggest smile on my face, was the first time not just seeing the baby, but seeing the baby smile.
That's lovely. It's so nice. I often have people share with me that their kids have been one of their best experiences. So there is definitely some synergy amongst being a parent, I think. Okay, question number 2. What's one thing that you would like to attempt before you die?
Good question. Attempt before I die. I'd like to learn how to speak Spanish.
Nice.
Spanish was my family's primary language, but my parents were of that immigrant mentality that the kids were going to be American as quickly as possible. So even though my father would talk to his family in Spanish, they would never speak in front of us or never teach us. But I keep saying one day, especially living in California, where, Spanish is not necessarily a second language, but very possibly your first. I keep saying one day I'm going to have enough time and I'm going to learn to speak it.
Yeah, beautiful. Awesome. Okay, who or what brings out your best?
Well, these days it's my little grandbaby, because he's great, because I have, my daughter actually lives on a second house on my property, and I get to see him whenever I want. And, it's just, it's a whole different experience being able to do what you can without having the pressures of working all the time and trying to build your career, doing that stuff.
Yeah, wonderful. It must be so nice having them on the property too, because then you can just hang out together much more.
Yeah, and you could give them back when they smell.
Exactly. How old is the grandbaby?
17 months now.
Okay, so very cute and cuddly. Yeah, awesome. Okay, my final question for today is, what did you enjoy most about our conversation?
I just, I think every time I do an interview and stuff, people always ask me a question that make me remember things that I don't necessarily think about on a daily basis. Kind of that, looking back and going, yeah, I did that. That was actually kind of, because I don't really take a lot of it seriously. But then when I talk about it, I go, you know what? Like when we were talking about introducing Putin and Kissinger, it's not something I think about every day. But, when I mention it, I go, holy shit, I did that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to chat with me. It's been a delight, and I will place the links to your book for our listeners to purchase and have a read and a laugh and check out some recipes. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me, Larry.
Okay, thank you.